When everyone else failed, she succeeded with just one song. The millionaire, upon seeing the maid calm her autistic son, couldn't hold back his tears. If you enjoy emotional stories, subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. Continuing. The mansion gate hissed open electronically, and Marina felt her heart quicken. It was the first day, the first of many, she hoped. At 26, with a worn backpack on her shoulders and a resume that barely filled half a page, she was there, in the Upper East Side neighborhood of New York City, about to start as a housekeeper in the home of one of the capital's wealthiest businessmen. The house was imposing. It wasn't just large, it was masterful. 3 stories of modern architecture, with immense windows reflecting the grey sky of that March morning. The gardens were too perfect, almost artificial, as if every leaf had been positioned by a designer. Marina walked along the cobblestone path, feeling the weight of the security camera's gaze following her. Everything there seemed calculated, controlled, meticulously organized, but Marina knew there were things no money in the world could control. She knew because she had lived it firsthand, because she had spent sleepless nights holding the hand of a boy who couldn't say he was scared, because she had seen medicine fail, doctors give up, and life slip through her fingers like fine sand. Her brother, Peter, was only 8 when he passed. Severe autism, respiratory complications, an infection his fragile little body couldn't fight. It had been 3 years, and it still hurt as if it had been yesterday. "You must be Marina," the voice came from the main door, a middle-aged woman in uniform with a professional but gentle smile. "I'm Wilma, the house manager. Come in, I'll show you everything." Marina entered. The interior was even more impressive than the exterior. Marble walls, crystal chandeliers, a grand staircase that looked straight out of an American movie. Everything smelled of cleanliness, expensive products, and almost oppressive order. "The house has 4 permanent staff," Wilma explained as she walked through the corridors. "I take care of the general organization. There's Mr. Anthony, who is the driver and security, Joanna in the kitchen, and now you, who will take care of cleaning the ground floor and help wherever needed. Mr. Edward is very demanding, but fair. He pays well on time and usually doesn't cause trouble. It's just him and his young son living here, and his mother, Mrs. Helen, who has an apartment on the 3rd floor but is always circulating throughout the house." Marina nodded, trying to absorb all the information. "And the boy? How old is he?" Wilma paused. She looked at Marina with an expression difficult to decipher. "Gabriel, 5 years old. He's special. He has autism. Quite severe. We've had 4 nannies here in the last 6 months. The current one, Christine, has been here for 2 months and seems like she'll last. But it's not easy. The boy has meltdowns. He screams. He hurts himself. It's difficult to watch." Marina's heart tightened. She hadn't said anything about Peter in the interview. She didn't think it was relevant. But now, hearing about Gabriel, she felt a pang in her chest, a mixture of pain and something else, something like purpose. "I understand," Marina said softly. "You won't have much contact with him, don't worry," Wilma continued. "He stays mostly upstairs. There's a sensory room, adapted space, those kinds of things. Mr. Edward hires the best therapists in New York City, spends a fortune. But the boy, he's very withdrawn. He barely interacts." Marina wanted to ask more, but Wilma had already moved on, showing the laundry room, the pantry, the service area. The rest of the morning was a succession of instructions: how to fold towels, where the cleaning products were kept, which rooms she should prioritize. Marina absorbed everything with the attention of someone who couldn't afford to make a mistake. She needed that job. She needed the money to help her mother, who had fallen into depression and debt since Peter's death. It was almost noon when Marina began cleaning the living room. A huge space with beige leather sofas, a giant screen TV, and bookshelves full of books that seemed never to have been opened. She carefully wiped the furniture, as if each object were a museum piece. She was concentrated, lost in her own thoughts when she heard it. A scream. It wasn't a common scream. It was a visceral, desperate sound that cut through the air like a blade. It came from upstairs. Marina dropped the cloth and ran. She climbed the marble staircase without thinking, guided only by an instinct she knew too well. Wilma appeared in the hallway, startled. "What was that?" "I don't know. I'm going to see." They followed the sound to one of the bedrooms on the 2nd floor. The door was ajar. Inside, Marina saw a scene that made her blood run cold. A small boy with disheveled brown hair was in the corner of the room, banging his head against the wall, hard, with terrifying violence. He screamed, or rather made high-pitched, continuous sounds that seemed to come from a place of pure pain. His small hands were clenched into fists, his whole body tense, trembling, and the nanny, Christine, was leaning against the wall on the other side of the room, paralyzed, with tears streaming down her face. "I don't know what to do," she sobbed. "I don't know. He won't stop. I can't." "Christine, you need to get him away from the wall," Wilma said, her voice loud but unsure what to do. Marina felt her legs move on their own. She entered the room slowly, very slowly. Wilma tried to hold her back. "Marina, no. You don't know how to handle this. He could hurt you." But Marina was already inside. She knelt on the floor, a safe distance from the boy. She didn't try to touch him. She didn't scream. She didn't make sudden movements. She just closed her eyes and began to sing. It was an old lullaby, one her grandmother used to sing when Marina was little. "Hush, little baby, don't say a word." But Marina changed the lyrics, softened them, made the melody slower, more enveloping. It was the same song she sang to Peter when he had meltdowns, when the world became too big and too scary for him. Marina's voice was low, almost a musical whisper. She swayed gently, as if rocking an invisible child. She didn't open her eyes. She just sang and sang and sang. Seconds felt like hours, and then slowly the screams began to diminish. The banging on the wall grew weaker. Gabriel stopped. He was still trembling, but he had stopped. He turned his head towards Marina. His eyes, large and dark, were full of tears. Marina slowly opened her eyes and met the boy's gaze. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. She just kept singing, very softly now, almost a murmur. Gabriel took a shaky step towards her. Then another. And then suddenly he threw himself into Marina's lap and began to cry. But it was a different cry. It wasn't despair. It was relief. Marina hugged him carefully as if he were made of glass. She ran her hand through his hair slowly and continued humming. Gabriel snuggled in, his small face buried in her shoulder, his sobs gradually diminishing. Wilma was speechless. Christine had stopped crying and was looking at the scene in disbelief. And at the door, unnoticed by anyone, stood a tall man in a dark suit, his eyes fixed on Marina and his son. Edward Almeida was 38 years old. He owned one of the largest construction companies in the country. He had buildings with his name in 3 states. He had dined with ministers, closed multi-million-dollar contracts, chaired meetings with hundreds of employees. But nothing, absolutely nothing in his life had prepared him for that moment, to see his son calm down, to see Gabriel, who would scream for hours, who would hurt himself, who rejected any touch, snuggled in a stranger's lap. And not by medication, not by restraint, but by a song. Edward felt his eyes sting. It had been years since he had cried. Not since the day his ex-wife had left, abandoning a 3-year-old baby with a diagnosis she couldn't accept. Not since the day he realized he would be alone in that battle. But there, in that moment, he was not alone. He quickly wiped his eyes, composed himself, and entered the room. Marina looked up and, seeing him, tensed. "Sir, I'm sorry, I shouldn't be here. I just, No." Edward's voice was firm but gentle. You did what no one else has been able to do in years." He knelt beside her and looked at his son. Gabriel's eyes were closed now, breathing deeply, still clinging to Marina. "How did you—" Marina hesitated. "My brother," she said, her voice choked. "He had autism. I took care of him his whole life until he passed." Edward nodded slowly. He didn't need further explanation. He understood the language of loss. "What's your name?" "Marina. Marina Silva." "Marina," he repeated as if committing it to memory. "Thank you." Gabriel began to stir, signaling he wanted to get out of her lap. Marina gently released him, and the boy moved away, went to the bed and lay on his side facing the wall but calm. She slowly stood up, wiped her hands on her uniform pants and looked at Edward with a mixture of embarrassment and determination. May I go back to work?" Edward watched her for a long moment. There was something about her, something that went beyond technique, training, experience. There was empathy. There was pain transformed into care. "You may," he said, "but I'd like to speak with you later." If you don't mind. Marina nodded and left the room, passing Wilma and Christine, who were still in shock. She went down the stairs, her legs trembling. Only when she reached the laundry room, away from everyone, did she lean against the wall and let the tears fall. Peter. She had seen Peter in that boy, in the frightened eyes, in the tense body, in the need to be understood in a world that made no sense. And for a moment, just for a moment, she had managed to make a difference. Perhaps that was why she was there. Perhaps life had a strange way of putting people in the right places. That night, before leaving, Marina was called to Edward's office. It was an elegant room with mahogany bookshelves, abstract paintings, and a huge desk. He was sitting but stood up when she entered. "Marina, please have a seat." She sat on the edge of the chair, nervous. Edward also sat and looked at her attentively. "I wanted to make you a proposal. I know you were hired for cleaning, but I saw what you did today. I saw how my son reacted to you, and He took a deep breath. "I would like you to spend more time with him. Not as a nanny, not officially, but if during your work you can be around, interact, help when he needs it. I would pay an additional fee, a significant one." Marina blinked, surprised. "Sir, I'm not a therapist. I don't have training. I know. But you have something no therapist here has managed to have. You have a connection, and Gabriel needs that more than any method." She remained silent, processing. It was an opportunity, but it was also an enormous responsibility, and a painful one, because caring for Gabriel would, in a way, be reliving Peter every day. "I accept," she said finally, "but with one condition. I do it my way. No pressure. No miraculous expectations. Gabriel will set the pace, not me." Edward smiled for the first time, a small but genuine smile. Agreed. And that was how Marina Silva, the housekeeper from Queens, who had lost her brother and almost lost hope, began to change the life of an entire family, unaware that in the process, her own life would also be completely transformed. In the following days, Marina returned to the mansion every day with a mixture of anticipation and fear. Gabriel, as Edward had warned, was not an easy child. He had good days and terrible days. Days when he allowed Marina to approach, and days when he screamed at the slightest movement. But she didn't give up. She maintained her routine. She cleaned the house, but always passed by his room, always sang softly, always let her presence be noticed without being intrusive. And little by little, something began to change. Gabriel started looking for her. On the third day, he came downstairs alone and stood at the living room door watching Marina clean. She pretended not to notice, but continued humming as she worked. He stayed there for 10 minutes. On the 5th day, he moved closer. He sat on the floor near her. On the 7th day, when Marina sang the same lullaby, Gabriel repeated a sound. A small sound, almost imperceptible, but it was an echo, an attempt at communication. Edward observed everything from a distance. He worked from home whenever possible now, just to follow that silent miracle happening in his living room. And as he watched Marina sing to his son, as he saw Gabriel slowly begin to smile, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. But not everything in the Almeida mansion was harmony. Upstairs, Mrs. Helen, Edward's mother and Gabriel's grandmother, observed this new dynamic with critical eyes full of disdain. To her, Marina was nothing more than an employee overstepping her boundaries. And Mrs. Helen did not tolerate overstepped boundaries. The storm was brewing, and Marina, innocent and hopeful, still didn't know that the biggest challenge of her life was about to begin. Weeks went by, and the Almeida mansion began to take on a new atmosphere. Where before there had only been heavy silence and constant tension, now there were small moments of lightness. Gabriel still had his meltdowns, still spent entire days without speaking, but something fundamental had changed. He had someone who understood him without needing words. Marina developed her own routine. She arrived at 7 in the morning, exchanged a few words with Wilma while having coffee in the kitchen, and then started her work. But now that work included Gabriel. She sang as she mopped the floor, and the boy would sit on the stairs to listen to her. She organized his toys in the sensory room, and he watched every movement, sometimes picking up an object and handing it back to her, as if it were a silent game between the two. Edward saw everything, and the more he saw, the more he found himself thinking about that woman, It wasn't physical attraction, or at least it wasn't just that. It was admiration. It was gratitude. It was the recognition that Marina had done in weeks what armies of therapists hadn't been able to do in years. Gabriel was interacting. He was making eye contact. He had even managed a small smile when Marina made a funny face while cleaning the windows. A smile. Something so simple for any parent, but for Edward it was like watching the sun rise for the first time. One Thursday in late April, Edward invited Marina to have coffee with him in the garden. She hesitated, but he insisted. "Just 15 minutes. I want to talk about Gabriel." She accepted, somewhat uncomfortable, and they sat at a small white iron table surrounded by jasmine. Edward personally served the coffee, a gesture that made Marina even more awkward. "Where do you live, Marina?" he asked, his voice genuinely interested. "In Queens. With my mother." "Far. Yes, I take 2 buses and the subway. But it's okay, I'm used to it." Edward took a sip of his coffee. "And your mother? How is she?" Marina was surprised by the question. No one there had asked about her personal life before. "She's recovering. After my brother died, she fell into a heavy depression. She took a lot of medication, got into debt with loan sharks. But she's getting better, slowly. I'm sorry. It must not have been easy." "It wasn't." Marina looked at the cup in her hands. "But we survive, right?" "We always survive." Edward observed her in silence. There was a strength in her that he rarely saw in people from his social circle. Her resilience built on real suffering, not the motivational coaching resilience his business colleagues often talked about. "Gabriel is different," Edward said, "and it's because of you. It's not because of me. It's because he's ready. I'm in the right place at the right time." "No, it's more than that." Edward leaned forward. "I've hired the best professionals in New York City. Psychologists, occupational therapists, speech therapists, all extremely qualified, but none of them achieved what you did." "Do you know why?" Marina shook her head. "Because you don't treat my son like a project. You treat him like a person, like someone who deserves to be understood, not fixed." Edward's words touched Marina deeply. She felt her eyes sting but held back her tears. "Your son is amazing, Mr. Edward. He just needs time. And patience, I know. And I will give you all the support you need. Anything, books, courses, equipment. Whatever you want." Marina smiled faintly. "You don't need any of that. You just need to let me keep singing." Edward laughed. A short but sincere laugh. It was the first time Marina had seen him laugh, but that moment of tranquility was about to be destroyed. That same afternoon, Marina was on the second floor organizing Gabriel's clothes when she heard the voice. A shrill female voice coming from the ground floor. "Edward, where are you? We need to talk now." Marina peered over the staircase and saw a woman entering the house. She was elegant in high heels, with a designer bag, impeccably styled hair. And she was furious. Mrs. Helen came down the stairs from the 3rd floor like an offended queen. "Patricia, what an unpleasant surprise." Edward appeared from the office, his face tense. "What do you want here?" "Patricia." The name echoed in Marina's mind. The ex-wife, Gabriel's biological mother. "I came to see my son," Patricia said, throwing her bag onto the sofa. "Or do you think you can stop me?" "You abandoned your son 2 years ago," Edward replied, his voice low but filled with anger. 2 years, Patricia. Not a single call. Not an email. Without asking if he was alive or dead. I was sick. I had postpartum depression. You can't blame me for that. Postpartum depression that lasted 2 years. Mrs. Helen stepped down the last stair with disdain. Patricia, please. We both know you simply couldn't handle having a different child. You ran away. Like a coward. Patricia turned to her mother-in-law with hatred. And you, Helen, have always been so perfect, haven't you? Always ready to judge. But where was your support? Where was your help when I begged for a break? My help was here. But you preferred to go to Paris with your lover. The tension in the room was palpable. Marina, still on the stairs, didn't know whether to go down or back up. That's when Patricia looked up and saw her. And who is this? Edward turned around. Marina, can you take Gabriel to the sensory room, please? Marina quickly descended, entered Gabriel's room, gently took the boy by the hand and led him to the other room. Gabriel, sensitive to the tension in the air, began to get agitated. Marina closed the door to the sensory room and turned on the sound machine that played nature sounds, trying to calm him, but she could still hear the voices downstairs. "I want custody of my son, Edward." "You what?" "You heard me. I'm fine now. I've had therapy. I've taken my medication. I'm stable. And I have the right to be a mother. You have no right. You lost that right when you left. The court will decide that. My lawyer is already preparing the papers, and you can be sure I'll win. Mothers always have preference in custody, you know that." Edward felt his blood boil. "You're not doing this for Gabriel. You're doing it for money. You want alimony. You want access to my bank account." Patricia smiled, cynical. "Think what you want, but in a few months Gabriel will be living with me, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." She picked up her bag, tossed her hair back, and left the mansion with the same arrogance with which she had entered. Edward stood in the middle of the room, his hands trembling. Mrs. Helen approached him. "She can't do that. We'll fight." "She can, Mother, and she will. The law is very strong with mothers, even with mothers who abandon." Upstairs, Marina hugged Gabriel, who had started crying without understanding why. She sang softly, trying to calm the boy and herself, because at that moment she realized that the fragile peace they had built was about to crumble, and she had no idea how to stop it. The following days were tense. Edward hired the best family lawyer in New York City, Dr. Augustus Merrill, a 60-year-old man with an impressive track record in complex cases. He came to the mansion on a Friday evening to talk with Edward. Marina was finishing her shift when Dr. Merrill arrived. He was serious, with thin glasses and an impeccable posture. Edward received him in the office, but called Marina in first. "I need you to be part of this meeting." "Me? Why?" "Because you can be a key witness." Marina swallowed hard and entered the office. Dr. Merrill greeted her formally, and the three sat down. "Mr. Edward," the lawyer began, "the situation is delicate. The biological mother does indeed have legal rights, but we have some points in our favor. First, abandonment of the home. 2 years without contact constitutes emotional abandonment. Second, medical history. Gabriel has special needs that require constant and specialized care. If we can prove that the mother does not have the emotional or financial structure for this, we have a chance." "She will claim she has recovered," Edward said. "That she underwent treatment. And she probably did. But treatment doesn't guarantee stability. We need concrete proof of negligence or incapacity." That's when Dr. Merrill looked at Marina. "And you, Miss?" "Marina." "Marina Silva. Miss Marina. Mr. Edward told me that you have a special bond with Gabriel. Can you tell me about it?" Marina took a deep breath and told her story. About the first day, about the meltdown, about the song, about Peter, about how Gabriel had started to interact. Dr. Merrill listened carefully, taking notes. "Interesting. Very interesting." He took off his glasses and looked at Edward. "She could be our secret weapon." "What do you mean?" Marina asked. "If we go to trial, we will need to show the judge that Gabriel has a stable maternal figure in his life. Someone who cares, who understands, who is present. And that person is you." Marina turned pale. "But I'm not his mother. I'm an employee. You are a caregiver. And in the case of children with special needs, that carries a lot of weight. If you testify, if you show the progress Gabriel has made under your care, it could make a difference." Edward looked at Marina with an expression that mixed hope and guilt. "I won't force you to do anything, but if you accept..." Marina looked at the two men. Then she looked at her own hands, rough from so much work. She was a housekeeper from Queens. She was going to testify in court against a rich woman in a $1 million legal battle to defend a businessman's right to keep his son. In any other context, it would be absurd, but there was Gabriel. Gabriel, who for the first time had looked into her eyes and smiled. Gabriel, who had held her hand. Gabriel, who had whispered a sound similar to her name. "I'll do it," Marina said. "I'll do whatever it takes." Edward closed his eyes, relieved. "Thank you." Dr. Merrill smiled faintly. "Excellent. Then let's start preparing." But what none of them knew was that Patricia had already started to make her move. And she was not alone. 3 weeks later, on a Monday morning, Marina arrived at the mansion and found Edward receiving a court order. It was the custody lawsuit papers. Patricia had formalized the request, And more, she had obtained an injunction that stipulated that Marina should be removed from contact with Gabriel until the process was decided. The allegation was that Marina was usurping the maternal role and negatively influencing the child. Edward was furious. "This is absurd. She can't do this." Dr. Merrill, who had rushed over as soon as he was notified, read the documents with a grim face. "She can, and she did. It's a dirty strategy, but legal. Her argument is that you are using the employee to replace the figure of the biological mother." The judge issued a temporary injunction until the hearing. "And when is the hearing?" Edward asked. 6 weeks from now." Marina felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. "I can't see Gabriel anymore." Dr. Merrill looked at her with pity. "Not until the trial." "I'm sorry." Edward punched the table. "This will destroy my son. He needs her." "I know, and we will use that as an argument. But for now we have to follow the court order." Marina felt the tears stream down. They weren't tears for her. They were for Gabriel. For that boy who had just learned to trust and who was now going to be deprived of the only person who could calm him. She went up to his room one last time. Gabriel was playing with building blocks, sitting on the rug. Seeing her, he smiled. That small but genuine smile, which had become the best part of Marina's day. "Hi, Gabriel," she said, her voice trembling. He waved his hand, a gesture he had learned from her. Marina knelt. "I'll need to be away for a while, okay? But I'll be back. I promise I'll be back." Gabriel didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. He understood the sadness. He stopped playing and looked at her, confused. Marina kissed his forehead, hugged him tight, and left the room before he could see her tears. She walked down the stairs, past Edward without saying anything, and left the mansion. In the following days, Gabriel began to regress. The meltdowns returned. He screamed at night, refused to eat, banged his head again. Edward tried to calm him, but nothing worked. Not the songs, not the toys, not the therapists. Gabriel wanted Marina. And Marina in her small room in Queens cried every night, feeling that she had failed once more. Because she had loved. And when you love someone with autism, you know that love needs to be constant. You know that absence hurts more than with any other child, and she had been forced to be absent. Edward called her every day, sent messages, updated her about Gabriel, and every message was a stab to her heart, because she knew she could help, but she was forbidden to do so, until a piece of news changed everything. Patricia had obtained supervised visitation. Gabriel was going to spend a weekend with her, and when the boy returned, he was different. He was scared, he was hurt, and Edward decided it was time to fight with every weapon he had, even if that meant exposing the worst secrets of that family. Patricia's apartment was in Greenwich Village, in a modern building with a 24-hour doorman and a gym on the ground floor. It was beautiful, well located, but there was nothing of Gabriel there. No adapted toys, no established routine, no preparation to receive a child with special needs. Gabriel spent the entire weekend crying. When Edward went to pick him up on Sunday night, he found his son locked in the bedroom, his clothes dirty, his hair disheveled, red marks on his arms where he had scratched himself. Patricia was in the living room on the phone laughing at some joke, as if there wasn't a child suffering in the next room. Edward didn't say a word. He picked Gabriel up, wrapped him in a blanket and left with the boy clinging to his neck. In the car, as he drove back home, Edward looked in the rearview mirror at his son in the back seat. Gabriel was huddled, staring into space in a state of shock, and Edward felt a fury grow inside him, a fury he hadn't felt in years. Patricia was not going to keep Gabriel, not if he could help it. On Monday morning, Dr. Merrill was already at the mansion at 8 o'clock. Edward had called him as soon as Gabriel fell asleep, desperate, asking for an urgent meeting. "I need you to see this," Edward said, showing photos he had taken of Gabriel's arms. The scratch marks were evident. "And there's more. Her apartment has nothing for a child, nothing, not even a toy. She left my son locked in an empty room all weekend." Dr. Merrill examined the photos carefully. "This is clear negligence, but we need more than photos. We need documented evidence, medical reports, witnesses, history. Then we'll get it." "Edward, I need to ask you something. How far are you willing to go?" Edward looked at the lawyer without hesitation. "As far as it takes." Dr. Merrill nodded. "All right. Then I'll hire a private investigator, a good one. He'll dig up everything about Patricia. Social media, financial history, relationships, routine, everything. Do it. While Edward fought his legal battle, Marina was at home, trying to maintain her sanity. She had gone back to working in family homes in the area, sporadic cleaning jobs that barely paid the bills, but at least kept her busy. But not a day went by without her thinking about Gabriel, about how he was doing, if he was eating properly, if he was having meltdowns, if he was calling for her. Her phone rang on a Wednesday afternoon. It was Edward. "Marina, I need to talk to you. Can you come to my house tonight?" I can. But the injunction, it's not to see Gabriel. It's for something else. Trust me. Marina took the subway and her usual 2 buses. She arrived at the mansion at 7 in the evening. Edward received her personally, along with Dr. Merrill. The 3 sat in the office. Edward served water to Marina, who was nervous. "Marina," Dr. Merrill began, "we have found evidence of Patricia's negligence. Gabriel came back hurt from her house. We have photos. We have Edward's report, and we will request a medical report. But we need more. We need people to see the contrast, see what Gabriel was like before, what he became with you, and what he became again without you." Marina listened, trying to understand where this was going. "I want you to testify at the hearing," Edward said. "I want you to tell the judge what happened on the first day. How Gabriel reacted to you, how he evolved. But I'm nobody. I'm just a—" "You are not just anything," Edward interrupted, his voice firm. "You are the most important person in my son's life, and I need the judge to know that." Marina felt her eyes sting. "What if I'm not convincing? What if the judge thinks I'm making it up?" Dr. Merrill leaned forward. "Marina, I will prepare you. We will rehearse your testimony. I will ask you all the difficult questions Patricia's lawyer will ask, and you will answer with the truth. Only the truth. Because the truth is stronger than any strategy." Marina took a deep breath. "Okay, I'll do it." The next few days were intense. Dr. Merrill trained Marina on Saturday and Sunday afternoons. He asked aggressive questions, tried to deconstruct her story, questioned her intentions. And Marina, at first trembling and insecure, gained confidence. Because she wasn't lying. She was just telling what she had lived. Meanwhile, the private investigator hired by Edward, a former federal agent named Robert, was doing his job. And he was good. Very good. Robert discovered that Patricia was in a relationship with a real estate businessman, a married man with children, who was paying for her apartment in Greenwich Village. He also discovered that Patricia had made social media posts during the period she claimed to be in deep depression. Posts about trips to Cancun, dinners at expensive restaurants, parties in Dubai. Nothing consistent with someone undergoing intensive psychiatric treatment. And more. He discovered that Patricia had filed the custody lawsuit 2 days after Edward had cut off the alimony he had been voluntarily paying her, even without legal obligation since their separation. It was all about money. Robert compiled everything into an 80-page dossier. Photos, screenshots of conversations, bank statements, testimonies from neighbors in her building who confirmed that Gabriel had spent the weekend crying. It was an arsenal of evidence. Dr. Merrill read the dossier and smiled for the first time in weeks. "This is gold, Edward. Pure gold." But there was a problem. Marina. In one of the preparation sessions, Dr. Merrill showed her part of the dossier. He showed photos of Patricia at parties, compromising messages, bank statements, and he suggested that Marina use this in her testimony. When they ask you why you think Gabriel should stay with his father, you can mention that the mother lacks emotional stability. You can say that you saw inappropriate behaviors. Marina looked at the photos. She looked at Patricia smiling on a beach, drinking champagne, living a life that she, Marina, would never have. And she felt pity. "I won't do that." "What do you mean?" Dr. Merrill frowned. "I won't destroy the woman. I will talk about Gabriel, about what I saw, about how he evolved, about how he needs stability. But I won't attack his mother, because in the end she is also human. She also suffered. She just didn't have the strength to cope." Edward looked at Marina with an expression she couldn't decipher. Admiration? Incredulity? "Marina, this woman is trying to take my son from me," he said, his voice controlled but tense. "She doesn't deserve your compassion." "It's not about what she deserves. It's about who I am." Marina stood up. "I will fight for Gabriel. I will say everything he needs, everything I saw, everything I believe. But I won't do it by stepping on another person. Because if I do that, I become as bad as anyone who has ever despised me for being poor, for being an employee, for being from Queens. There was a heavy silence in the room. Dr. Merrill sighed. All right, let's do it your way. But know that Patricia's lawyer will not have the same scruple. I know. And I'm ready. The hearing was scheduled for a Friday at the New York City Family Court. Marina woke up at 5 in the morning, spent an hour choosing what to wear, and ended up opting for a simple white blouse and dark jeans. She didn't have formal attire. She didn't have high heels. She only had herself. Edward sent the driver to pick her up in Queens. When Marina got into the car, he was there in a dark suit, his eyes tired from sleepless nights. "How are you?" he asked, nervous. "Me too." They remained silent for almost the entire journey, but as they were arriving at the courthouse, Edward held her hand. It was a quick, impulsive gesture, which he soon undid. But Marina felt it. She felt the tremor in his hand. She felt the fear. "We'll make it," she said. "It's going to be all right." Edward merely nodded. The courthouse was crowded. There were other families waiting for hearings, lawyers rushing with folders under their arms, security guards checking documents. Marina and Edward followed Dr. Merrill to the hearing room. Patricia was already there with her lawyer, a woman with blonde hair tied back, a red pantsuit, and a sharp expression. Patricia looked at Marina with disdain. Marina looked back, but without hatred, only with firmness, and the judge entered. She was a woman in her 50s, with grey hair, reading glasses hanging from her neck. She sat down, struck the gavel, and the hearing began. First it was Patricia's lawyer's turn. She spoke about maternal rights, about postpartum depression, about how Patricia had recovered and was ready to exercise her motherhood. She presented psychiatric reports, treatment certificates, letters of recommendation from therapists. Then it was Dr. Merrill's turn. He presented the investigator's dossier, the photos, the statements, the messages. Patricia turned pale. Her lawyer tried to contest, but the evidence was too solid. Then it was time for the witnesses. First, it was Wilma. She testified about the house routine, about how Gabriel had evolved with Marina, about how he had regressed afterward. She was objective, clear, professional. Then it was Christine, the former nanny. She recounted the day of the meltdown, how she had panicked, how Marina had calmed Gabriel with a song. And then it was Marina's turn. She stood up, her legs trembling, and walked to the front. She swore to tell the truth and sat down. Dr. Merrill began the interrogation. "Miss Marina, can you tell us how you met Gabriel?" Marina took a deep breath and began to speak. She told about the first day, about the meltdown, about the song. She told about Peter, about how she had learned to deal with autism through pain and love. She told about Gabriel's small progress, about his smiles, about his sounds, about his touch. The room was in absolute silence. When she finished, it was Patricia's lawyer's turn to ask questions. And she was cruel. "Miss Marina, you have no training in pedagogy, psychology, or occupational therapy, correct?" "Correct." "So, in fact, you were performing a function without qualification?" Marina looked at the lawyer without flinching. "I was taking care of a child who needed affection. I don't know if you need a diploma for that." Some muffled laughter in the room. The lawyer didn't like it. "Don't you think you're overstepping your boundaries? A housekeeper who thinks she's a mother?" Marina felt the sting but didn't falter. "I never thought I was a mother. I thought I was a caregiver. And there's a huge difference between the two. A mother is who gives birth. A caregiver is who stays." The judge looked up from the proceedings. She was paying attention. "And you think the biological mother shouldn't have a second chance?" the lawyer continued. Marina was silent for a moment. Then she replied, her voice firm but gentle. "I think everyone deserves a second chance, but not at the cost of a child's suffering. Gabriel is not a redemption project. He is a boy who needs stability. And if his mother has truly recovered, if she is truly well, then let her prove it slowly, with visits, with supervision. But to take him away from whom he knows, from whom he trusts, just to satisfy a wounded ego, that's not love. That's selfishness." Patricia turned red. She opened her mouth to protest, but her lawyer held her back. Dr. Merrill smiled discreetly. Then it was Edward's turn to testify. He told about the last 2 years, about the sleepless nights, about the expenses for treatment, about the despair of seeing his son suffer and not knowing how to help. And he told about the day he saw Marina sing to Gabriel, and how that had changed everything. When he finished, he was crying. Not dramatic tears, but silent tears, from someone who had held in so much pain for so long that it was overflowing. The judge called a recess. 15 minutes for everyone to breathe. Marina left the room and went to the restroom. She washed her face, looked at herself in the mirror, and tried to calm her racing heart. When she returned, she found Edward in the hallway. "You were incredible," he said. "I just spoke the truth." "I know. And that's why you were incredible." They returned to the room. The judge was already back. And then she did something unexpected. She asked for Gabriel to be brought in. Edward tensed. "Your Honor, my son has severe autism. He might be frightened by the environment." "I understand, Mr. Edward, but I need to see him, briefly accompanied by a social worker, just so I can form my conviction." 10 minutes later, Gabriel entered the room. He was with a social worker, a young woman in a lab coat who held his hand. The boy looked at the floor, his shoulders tense, his hands clenched. The entire room watched. Gabriel looked around. He saw Patricia. He didn't react. He saw Edward. He became slightly less tense. And then he saw Marina, and something happened. Gabriel let go of the social worker's hand and began to walk. Trembling, uncertain steps, but determined. He crossed the room, past the lawyer, past Patricia, past Edward, and went straight to Marina. When he got close to her, he stopped. He looked up and whispered, his voice faint but clear, "Nina." It was her name, or the closest he could say. Marina knelt, her eyes full of tears, and hugged him. Gabriel snuggled into her, closed his eyes, and for the first time since he had entered the room, relaxed. The judge took off her glasses, wiped her own eyes, and everyone in the room knew that child had chosen, and his choice was what mattered most. Judge Maria Beatrice Fletcher had 23 years of magistracy. She had judged hundreds of custody cases, had seen families destroyed and rebuilt, had made decisions that changed entire lives. But that day in that room, before that boy clinging to his caregiver, she felt something different. She felt that this decision was not about laws. It was about humanity. She gently struck the gavel and asked for silence. Gabriel was still in Marina's lap, who was stroking his hair, humming softly the same lullaby she had sung on the first day. "I will ask the social worker to take the child back. I need to deliberate." The social worker approached carefully. Gabriel resisted a little, but Marina whispered something in his ear and he went. He looked back once before leaving, his big eyes seeking the certainty that she wouldn't disappear. Marina waved. He waved back and left. The judge leafed through the documents in front of her. She read the reports, examined the photos, reviewed the testimonies. Then she took off her glasses and looked at everyone in the room. "This is a complex case," she began, her voice firm but serene. "It involves maternal rights, paternal rights, and above all the right of a child who cannot defend himself. Gabriel is not an object to be disputed. He is a human being with very specific needs, requiring specialized care, patience, and most importantly, constant presence." Patricia was pale, her hands clasped in her lap. Edward barely breathed. "I have analyzed the evidence presented by the father's defense, the images, the conversations, the financial history, and I have also analyzed the reports presented by the mother, proving her psychiatric treatment and her alleged recovery." Patricia's lawyer smiled slightly. "But," the judge continued, now looking directly at Marina, "I cannot ignore what I witnessed here. I cannot ignore the child's behavior. I cannot ignore the fact that, when given the opportunity to choose, Gabriel chose. He chose who makes him feel safe." Marina closed her eyes, holding back tears. "Therefore, my decision is as follows. Custody remains with the father, Edward Almeida. The mother, Patricia Costa, will have the right to supervised visits bi-weekly, in an appropriate location and in the presence of a child psychologist specializing in autism. These visits will be re-evaluated every 3 months, and only after proof of a healthy bond and emotional stability of the parent will there be progression to unsupervised visits." Patricia closed her eyes. Her lawyer placed a hand on her shoulder. "Furthermore," the judge continued, now looking directly at Marina, I recommend that Miss Marina Silva be officially hired as a specialized caregiver for the child, with formal registration and all labor rights. Her role was decisive for Gabriel's well-being, and this needs to be legally recognized and protected. Marina's eyes widened. She didn't expect this. The judge struck the gavel. Case closed. Edward stood up, hugged Dr. Merrill, and then looked at Marina. She was still sitting in shock, trying to process everything. He extended his hand to her. She took it, and the two left that room knowing that one battle had ended, but a new journey was just beginning. Outside in the hallway, Marina finally broke down. She cried as she hadn't cried in years. She cried for Peter, who had passed but left a legacy of love. She cried for Gabriel, who would now have the chance to grow up with stability. She cried for herself, who had survived so much pain and was now being recognized, valued. Edward stood there beside her, saying nothing, just present. When the tears dried, Marina wiped her face and smiled. "Thank you. No, thank you." In the following months, life at the Almeida mansion changed completely. Marina was officially hired as Gabriel's caregiver, with a fair salary, a signed contract, and respected hours. She had a room in the house now, for the days when she needed to stay late or when Gabriel had night meltdowns. Gabriel flourished. With Marina present daily, he began to make impressive progress. He learned to use alternative communication with picture cards. He started accepting more foods. His meltdowns drastically reduced, and most importantly, he began to show affection. He hugged Marina spontaneously. He smiled when Edward came home from work. Even with Wilma, he had developed an affectionate relationship. Edward observed everything with a mixture of joy and something more. Something he tried to deny, but that grew every day. He was falling in love with Marina. It wasn't a sudden passion or based on appearance. It was something deep, built on respect, admiration, and complicity. It was seeing Marina singing to Gabriel on Saturday mornings. It was hearing her laughter echoing through the house. It was the way she treated everyone with the same respect, from the driver to the house manager. It was her strength, her dignity. But Edward knew there was an abyss between them. He was a millionaire businessman. She was a caregiver from Queens. Their worlds would never organically meet. And he didn't want to be the boss who took advantage of an employee. He didn't want Marina to feel pressured or obligated to reciprocate any of his feelings, so he kept everything to himself, and suffered in silence. Marina, in turn, also felt something. She felt it in the long conversations they had about Gabriel, in the nights when Edward arrived tired, and she prepared tea for him, in the glances that crossed and lasted a second longer than they should. But she was afraid of misinterpreting, afraid of losing that job, that stability, that place that finally felt like hers. So she also kept it to herself, and suffered in silence. The one who noticed everything was Mrs. Helen. The family matriarch, who had previously despised Marina, began to notice the changes in her son. Edward was lighter. He smiled more, and he always found excuses to be near the caregiver. One Sunday afternoon, Mrs. Helen called Marina for tea in her apartment on the 3rd floor. Marina went tense, expecting some criticism or complaint, but instead Mrs. Helen said, "My son is in love with you." Marina almost dropped the cup. "Mrs. Helen, Let me finish." The elderly lady placed her cup on the small table and looked at Marina with a piercing seriousness. "When you arrived here, I despised you. I thought you were just another employee trying to take advantage of the situation. But I was wrong." Marina remained silent. "You saved my grandson. You brought life back to this house. And you won my son over in a way I've never seen before. Not even with Patricia at the beginning of their relationship. Mrs. Helen, I'm not trying to... I know you're not. And that's why I'm telling you. Because you deserve to know. And because he will never have the courage to tell you." Marina felt her heart race. "And you accept this?" Mrs. Helen gave a small, almost sad smile. "It took me a while, but I learned something in these past few months. Family isn't about surnames or bank accounts. It's about who stays, about who cares, about who truly loves." She extended her hand and touched Marina's. "And you stayed. When no one else would stay, you stayed." Marina didn't know what to say, so she just nodded. But it was Marina's mother, Mrs. Celia, who gave the final push. Edward, in a gesture of generosity, had offered to pay for Marina's mother's health treatment. Mrs. Celia needed heart surgery, something the public healthcare system would take months to perform. Edward paid for everything, hired the best cardiologist in New York City, and ensured she received the best care. When Mrs. Celia recovered, she went to the mansion to thank him personally. Edward received her with all respect, and they talked at length. Mrs. Celia spoke about Peter, about the struggle to raise 2 children alone, about how Marina had sacrificed so much to care for her brother, and then her. "My daughter has a huge heart," Mrs. Celia said, "but she hides. She thinks she's too small for the world. She thinks she doesn't deserve to be happy." Edward listened, attentive. "I know you like her. A mother knows these things, and I can see in her eyes that she likes you too. But you two are too stubborn to admit it." Edward smiled awkwardly. "Mrs. Celia, I don't want Marina to feel pressured. Pressure is working 3 jobs to pay for medicine. Pressure is watching your child die in your arms. This isn't pressure. This is love. And true love knows no social class, no hierarchy. Love is about recognizing in the other someone who completes you." She stood up to leave, but before going, she said, "My daughter deserves to be happy, and so do you. Don't let the fear of a no ruin the chance of a yes." 2 weeks later, on a Friday night, Edward asked to speak with Marina in the garden. She went, her heart racing, not knowing what to expect. They sat in the same spot where they had talked months ago, surrounded by the jasmine that exuded perfume in the warm November breeze. "Marina," Edward began, his voice trembling, "I need to tell you something. And if you want to run away afterward, I'll understand." Marina tensed. "I'm in love with you. I think I have been since the first day, when I saw you singing to Gabriel. But it took me a long time to admit it because I was afraid. Afraid you would think I was taking advantage, afraid of ruining what we had built, afraid of losing you." Marina felt her eyes fill with tears. "But I can't pretend anymore. I can't bear to see you every day and have to hide it. So I need to ask you, even running the risk of everything going wrong, do you feel anything for me?" Marina was silent for a moment that seemed an eternity. Then she said, her voice low but firm, "I do. But I'm afraid." "Afraid of what?" "I'm afraid of not being enough. Afraid of your world swallowing me whole. Afraid of not belonging here." Edward took her hands. "Marina, you are the strongest person I have ever known. You survived losses that would destroy anyone. You transformed pain into love. You saved my son. For if there's anyone who isn't enough here, it's me. Because I have money, I have power, I have everything society says is important. But until you arrived, I didn't have the essential. I didn't have peace. I didn't have hope. I didn't have love," Marina cried. Not tears of sadness, but of liberation. "I love you," Edward said, "and I want to build a life with you. No matter what people say, no matter what society thinks. Only what we feel matters, and what Gabriel needs. And Gabriel needs you as a mother, and I need you as a partner." Marina hugged Edward and cried on his shoulder, and for the first time in years she felt she was home. They began dating discreetly, respecting their own pace. Edward didn't pressure, didn't force. He took her to simple dinners, walks in the park, long conversations. And gradually, Marina began to understand that true love has nothing to do with money or status. It has to do with respect, complicity, and the genuine desire to care for each other. 6 months later, on a quiet Sunday morning, as they had coffee in the garden and Gabriel played nearby, Edward knelt. He took a small box from his pocket and opened it. "Marry me. Not because I have money, not because you take care of Gabriel, but because I love you, because you make me want to be a better man, because with you I am complete." Marina looked at the simple, delicate, perfect ring. She looked at Gabriel, who had stopped playing and watched curiously. She looked at Edward, his eyes full of hope and fear, and she almost said no, because the girl from Queens, who had cleaned houses, who had lost her brother, who had lived in poverty, still thought that world wasn't for her. But then she remembered her mother's words. True love knows no hierarchy. And she remembered Gabriel, who didn't choose her because she was rich or poor, who chose her because she stayed. "Yes," she said, her voice choked. "Yes, I will marry you." Edward put the ring on her finger and kissed her. Gabriel clapped, not fully understanding what was happening but feeling the joy in the air. They married 3 months later, in a simple ceremony in the house garden. There weren't hundreds of guests. There was no pomp. There was Marina's mother, Mrs. Celia, radiant. There was Mrs. Helen, who for the first time truly smiled at her daughter-in-law. There were Wilma, Mr. Anthony, Joanna, Dr. Merrill, and a few close friends. And there was Gabriel. Gabriel, dressed in white, holding the rings on a small cushion, walking slowly to the altar. When he got close to Marina, he looked at her and for the first time said the full word, "Mommy." Marina cried so much that she had to stop the ceremony for a few minutes, because that was more than a wedding. It was the recognition that family is not about blood. It's about choice. The following years were filled with adjustments, challenges, but also much happiness. Gabriel continued to evolve. He entered a special school where he made friends. He started talking more, expressing himself, showing his preferences. He still had occasional meltdowns, still needed special care, but he was alive. He was happy. Marina became pregnant 2 years after the wedding. A girl named Helen, in honor of the grandmother who had learned to love without prejudice. When Helen was born, Gabriel wanted to hold her, and he held her with such delicate, loving care that everyone in the room cried. Patricia continued with supervised visits. Over time, she actually began to build a bond with Gabriel. She would never be the mother he knew, but she was a presence, and that was better than nothing. Edward expanded his businesses, but now with a different purpose. He began to invest in social projects aimed at children with autism. He built free care centers in peripheral neighborhoods, including one in Queens. And in all of them there was a plaque, the Gabriel and Peter Institute, because every child deserves to be understood. Marina went back to school. With Edward's encouragement, she studied pedagogy with a specialization in inclusive education. She graduated at 32 and began giving lectures on autism, telling her story, inspiring other families. Mrs. Celia, recovered and healthy, moved to an apartment near the mansion, maintaining her independence but always close to her daughter and grandchildren. And Mrs. Helen, the matriarch who was once tough and uncompromising, became the most loving grandmother the children could have. Because in the end, even the hardest heart can be transformed by true love. One December night, 10 years after that first day in the mansion, Marina and Edward were sitting on the same garden veranda. Gabriel, now 15, was in his room playing video games. Helen, 8 years old, ran through the garden catching fireflies. Edward held Marina's hand and said, "You know what I think?" "What?" "I think I was a poor millionaire. I had everything and had nothing. Until you arrived." Marina rested her head on his shoulder. "And I was a rich poor woman. I had nothing, but I had love. And in the end, love was what saved us." They stayed there in silence, listening to the sounds of the night and Helen's laughter. And then from inside the house came Gabriel's voice. "Mom! Dad, come see." It was the first time he had called them together, as a couple, as a family. Marina and Edward stood up and went, because that's what family is. It's answering the call, it's being present, it's choosing to stay. And they had chosen, every day they chose. And that was what made them a real family.